Hey guys, welcome back to my kitchen. I'm the Deglutenizer, and today I'm updating my buttermilk biscuit recipe. I'm going to visit the recipe in two different versions. One will use hydrogenated fat from shortening, and in the other version I will use some rendered fat, which will use a slightly different technique. So I'm going to get started on my hydrogenated shortening recipe first. So I'm starting off with 1 cup of gluten-free all-purpose flour, and I'm going to make sure to use the back of a knife and level my measuring cup. There we go. So 1 cup of gluten-free all-purpose flour. 1 cup of rice flour. I recommend brown rice flour if you can find it. Otherwise, white rice flour will be just fine. 1 teaspoon of baking powder. 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, 3/4 teaspoon of regular non-iodized table salt, and 1 teaspoon of xanthan gum. And get the dry ingredients whisked up together to break up any lumps in the flour and distribute the leaveners. Next up, I'm going to start adding my fats, starting with 1/2 stick of butter. And then I just want to make sure that my butter is cut up into chunks so that it will distribute more evenly in my dough. And to my bowl, I want to add 1/4 cup of shortening. So before I get my hands too messy, I'm going to go ahead and give my buttermilk a shake and measure out 1 cup into a liquid measure. And then I want to leave this handy in case my dough is still dry and if I need to add a little extra. So I'm going to get my hands in here and I want to make sure to thoroughly coat my shortening with flour so that way there's a barrier between the fat and my fingers and my hands won't get too messy. Also, with the shortening being hydrogenated, then it's not just going to melt in my hands. It has a higher melting point even than the butter, which is what's going to give me that delectable biscuit texture. Is just using 2 different fats with 2 different melting points. So then my butter I want to break in half and I want to just kind of mash it between my fingertips to get it broken up. Alright, I think I've got my fats broken up enough. There's still some larger chunks in here, but I'm going to roll this out and cut it into biscuits, so some larger chunks won't matter too much. So I'm going to go ahead and add my buttermilk. Alright, so that looks perfect. Now I just need to set up a tray. Alright, so I've got a tray lined with parchment paper. I've got a sheet of wax paper with some extra rice flour dumped on it. And I'm going to dump my dough out onto my floured wax paper. And I'm going to add a little extra flour to the top. Make sure that my hands are well coated. Make sure my cutter has a little bit of flour on it. So I want to make sure that I press straight down. And then I can twist. Carefully push my biscuit out. And you're gonna go right there. straight down, twist. And then I'm just going to round up my scraps. I like to pile up my scraps and make a little mini biscuit. Just like that. And this is ready to go into a 350-degree oven. So now for the difference between my shortening based recipe and my rendered fat based recipe. This is rendered pork fat. If you are kosher, you can use chicken or beef fat. So I got this from a pork loin that I trimmed the fat cap off of and cooked it down and harvested a whole bunch of delicious goodness. If you think this is gross, trust me when I tell you that your grandma did this all the time. So I'm using the same 1/4 cup measure. And I'm going to put my fat back in the fridge. Once again, I'm going to get my hands dirty. And just like before, I want to try and keep flour between my fingertips and my big chunk of fat. But because this is not hydrogenated, then it will actually melt from the heat of my hands. So I want to work quickly and keep reapplying flour as much as possible. So now I'm going to add my buttermilk and stir to combine. That still looks a smidge dry, so I'm going to add just a little splash extra. So I'm going to go ahead and flour my parchment. So because this dough does not contain any hydrogenated fats, and therefore will quickly turn into a puddle once it hits the heat of the oven, instead of cutting it into biscuit shapes, what I'm going to do is smooth out the edges, press it a little flat, and I'm going to use the edge of a dough scraper to cut my dough. Alright, so my first batch looks beautiful, gorgeous, stunning. So I'm going to let my shortening based biscuits cool off while my rendered biscuits are baking, and then I will plate them both up and you guys can see how each of them turned out. Alright, so here is one of my biscuits that used the shortening, and I just want to stab into the side a little bit with a fork, get it started. And there is my inside texture. As you can see, it really got those flaky layers, and it's got some nice crumb to it. And then this is one of my biscuits that used the rendered pork fat. So again, I'm going to get it started with a fork. open that up. And you can see it's got a lot more air holes in it, a larger crumb, and yeah, just an overall different texture that you can actually kind of just see when you look at it. I actually think I like the pork fat biscuits even better than the traditional biscuits that use the vegetable shortening. The texture, I feel like, is way better. Even though I didn't roll out or cut out actual biscuits with these, then it's so good. So good. Now, you might also be wondering, like, hey, she mentioned something about hydrogenated fat earlier when she didn't cut them out. So what hydrogenated fats do is that they increase the melting point of the fat. So the shortening doesn't actually melt until a higher temperature than the butter in the dough. The pork fat will melt at room temperature, basically. So these biscuits, basically all the fat turned to liquid earlier in the oven than the shortening based biscuits did. Oh man, it's so good. Anyway, these are delicious. You need to whip up a batch of either kind at your house as soon as possible. If you want to cut out your biscuits though and actually have, round biscuits, make sure to use the shortening. If you don't mind just hacking up a lump of dough into separate biscuits with a dough scraper or a knife, then go ahead and use some rendered fat. It is spectacular. I pretty much am converted to making exclusively those style of biscuits now. But I did want to make sure that you guys saw that I have updated my biscuit recipe and got your hands on the new recipe. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to my channel, and make sure to click the bell for notifications anytime I post a new video. My next video will be homemade ice cream. I'm making a strawberry basil mint ice cream that is to die for. So make sure that you stay tuned for that. And I'll see you guys next time on the Deglutenizer. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy my content, I hope you'll consider supporting me on Patreon for just $2 a month. Patrons receive early access to content, early announcements for upcoming projects, and much more. Help me grow by becoming a patron today.